PTSD, Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder in Emergency Services. Overview presentation for Fire and Emergency Services. This video is a copy of a PowerPoint presentation we put together for PTSD awareness and to introduce a peer support team. No intention is made to violate any copyrights of any pictures or videos. If you would like a copy of the original PowerPoint presentation, leave a comment. PTSD is a serious issue and likely has touched most of us directly or indirectly. Please give it the attention it deserves. For those of you that have great coping skills already, focus on how you can help others and recognize signs in others. Learn what to watch for in others and in yourself. A quick Google search will yield countless articles on PTSD. Why is that? Because it is a growing health issue that is now more widely acknowledged, diagnosed, and successfully treated. This is not a local problem, it's a national problem and international. It can affect anyone. Who helps those that help others?
Everybody wants to know, so everybody asks, what's the worst thing you've seen?
Decapitations, amputations, those sounds and sights that never leave you. There comes a point of any fracture.
We're taught to be tough, suck it up, don't say anything. So we suffer in silence. I couldn't continue, so I started drinking.
And that's when I informed her that I had thoughts of suicide.
Mental illness is still, to this day, an issue in the organization.
Shouldn't you be taking a serious look at whether what you're doing is working?
We could, yes. Are we doing that right now? No.
But these are the people there to protect you, and they won't be there to protect you. We need help.
The purpose of this material is not to help you cope with stress, anxiety, or depression, but to help you recognize it in yourself and others, and to identify some available resources. We have all been touched by trauma, death, and some of us unfortunately by suicide, depression, substance abuse, either on a call or through a family member or friend. Suicide and depression are real and happens more in emergency services employees. It is our hope that a peer support team can bring awareness to this issue and provide another option for support and direction for the team. At this point, in the original PowerPoint presentation, you would have pictures and names and contact information for the peer support member teams, and you would post this on all reasonable locations. We're all trained in ABCDE, AVPU, 30-2, OPQRST, but do we recognize the symptoms of SAD, substance abuse, suicide, anxiety, or depression? These are the most important acronyms that you can know. Just what is PTSD? It's a strong emotional response that happens days, weeks, months, or even years after one large traumatic experience or many smaller ones. In a group setting, you would ask this question. Do you know someone with a substance abuse problem? Ask the audience members to put up their hand and leave it up. Do you know someone who has attempted suicide? Do you know someone with depression or anxiety? Now look around the room and you will quickly see that these issues have faced many of us, or indirectly through our friends, colleagues, co-workers, family members. Many forms of cancer are now considered a line of duty death, making this the #1 killer of all firefighters. These are amazing and staggering statistics. Suicide now ranks 11th in the cause of death of emergency services. So how do we cope? With your audience, generate some discussion and see if you can think of ways that you can cope with stress, either on a daily basis or after a large traumatic event. Healthy coping may include talking to family, friends, coworkers, a counselor. Unhealthy coping could include drugs, alcohol, substance abuse. And if you're not able to cope, that may lead to suicide, anxiety, or depression and hopelessness. Volunteers are at a particularly high risk of developing PTSD and higher risk of stress and suicide. Why is that? Generate some discussion amongst your group. Volunteers tend to experience traumatic scenes or situations and then go home shortly or back to work and have no immediate outlet for coping with that stress. Sometimes they go home alone or back to work where they can't talk about what just happened. And your colleagues you may not see for weeks to talk about what happened at the last event. And generally, the volunteer departments work in a smaller community where you may know the patient, the victim, or the family, so you know the impact on your community. And typically, volunteers do not know their colleagues as well as a full-time department would. You don't see each other every day, day in, day out. It takes a large event to affect a large city or a country. However, a smaller event in a smaller community or town may have a larger impact. If you were a firefighter in Boston, how would you be affected by the Boston Marathon explosion? Whereas if you went to a call in a small town and it was a friend's brother or sister, how would that affect you? Awareness of mental health is the key. We all have bad days. It's normal to feel stressed out, depressed, tired. But when that lingers for months or years, we should be concerned. But at what time should we be concerned? What is stress? Stress is your body's way of responding to any kind of demand. It can be good stress, such as doing this presentation, or it can be bad stress. Stress causes positive responses to respond to threats, but when there is no actual threat, the changes to your body can be devastating. How do you recognize bad stress? In yourself, your colleagues, your family, your friends. PTSD is not restricted to emergency services. It can affect anyone in any profession at any time. We all have experienced good stress, playing a sport, competing, working ahead and working hard. Even this presentation does generate some good stress. If you're in a group setting, form a couple of groups and pose these questions, generate some discussion, and have a discussion out loud after 5 minutes. Awareness is the key, that every member of your team recognize stress responses in their self and in their colleagues. We've all seen someone with road rage or someone overreact to a situation. It wasn't the straw that broke the camel's back. It was a previous history of problems that have not been dealt with. It's a result of cumulative stress that can build up over time to a breaking point. Which camel are you? Stress can affect any or all aspects of your life. Everything is linked. Change how you think, change how you feel. Look at this chart, how everything is linked together. What you experience, what you see, what you feel, how you act. Can you name 4 natural responses to stress? We're familiar with fight and flight and freeze, but they're not always appropriate. And after a major event, we tend to recuperate. But what's an unhealthy response? That would be alcohol or substance abuse, or not dealing with the stress that you feel, or recognizing it. Unresolved or extended stress is where we get into trouble. Months, days, years potentially, your body and your mind still relives the event and experiences the trauma as if it was today, constantly wearing your body down and your mind. It's these cumulative responses to stress that can lead to serious health issues, including anxiety, depression, and PTSD, and ultimately suicide. There's 2 taps in life. Which are you? Tap A or Tap B? A bit of a spin-off from personality A's, type A personality. Do you hold your emotions in or do you let them flow out? Certainly letting them flow and taking care of them is the healthier response. Our feelings are like a tap. You can shut them off, or you can shut off just the bad ones. But when you shut them off, they stay inside and lead to stress, burnout, depression, and suicide. This is a moving picture of a firefighter from 9/11. How do you think this firefighter is feeling? Overwhelmed? Disbelief? Stressed? The loss of fellow firefighters, friends, family. How would they cope? How would you approach this firefighter? Would you know what to do and what not to do? How would you handle going to a call if you knew in advance one of the victims was a friend or a family member? What would you do? Miscellaneous events, whether it be repetitive events, symbolic events, like 9/11, the anniversary, events that have a personal meaning to you, threatening events on your life or colleagues or family member and friends. If there's a perceived lack of support or understanding within the workplace about what you experience, all of these can lead to PTSD. What emotions or reactions do you see here? Oh my goodness, shock, fear, curiosity, disbelief, terror, compassion, interest, horror, sadness. How many of you remember what you were doing on 9/11? This is how critical incidents affect us. Years later, you remember what you were doing and possibly even how you felt. What was your reaction? If it was similar, you may still have the same emotional response, even though you were trained in this type of thing. What emotions are these firefighters experiencing? Shock, fear, disbelief, hopelessness, resignation, breakdown, terror, horror, sadness. Would you recognize these in your spouse or family or a colleague? Do you know how and what to do to get them help? Even though they're trained to deal with this every day, events like this, a larger traumatic event, can have devastating emotional effects. Have you ever felt unraveled like the zebra? Just not yourself? Does it last? What would you do? Cumulative stress is common. We don't feel it building up like a critical event, yet it can have the same devastating effects on our life and on our health. Physical burnout, a long shift, etc., you quickly recover after a sleep. Mental burnout may last weeks or months of unresolved stress causing that problem. This can lead to depression and worse. If you're attending a group session, I recommend a break at this point. We've covered many topics and many aspects relating to stress in the first half of the session. In the second half, we will cover depression, substance abuse, and suicide. Traumatic stress, or critical incident stress, is a very intense arousal after a traumatic event which overwhelms your ability to cope with the situation, leaving individuals feeling out of control or helpless. A wide variety of responses are often seen: cognitive, emotional, physical, behavioral. These can lead to PTSD. Critical incidents can be defined as those events that are outside the normal range of experience. They disrupt our sense of control, and there's often a perceived threat to your own life or the life of others. They're unexpected. 9/11, Boston Marathon are prime examples. What are serious risk factors? Depression, alcohol use, divorce, unresolved grief, trauma, if you have access to firearms or other lethal means of death, family history of suicide, previous suicide attempts. Look around the room. 1 out of every 6 people that you know or work with have experienced depression. Feeling sad is normal. Depression are lows that have lasted weeks or months, and they can make it debilitating to try and struggle through life. They can lead to suicide. Again, sad statistics that over 60% of the people who die by suicide suffer from depression. If they drink, it's higher at 75%. And depressed patients, more than 30% of them commit suicide. The use of antidepressants has gone up 4-fold in the last 2 decades. Do you or a loved one have these feelings, or have you witnessed someone you care about struggling with them? Look for these key things. Sleep changes, especially waking up early in the morning or oversleeping consistently. You've lost interest in what you enjoy, from hobbies to sports to love. Irritability or restlessness, feeling helpless and hopeless. You may be eating more or less. You have a general sense of fatigue, and you can't concentrate or focus as well as you had in the past. You may have resorted to alcohol or drugs to deal with the feelings you have. You've isolated yourself socially. Why is alcohol and drug use not a healthy coping mechanism? Because it only numbs the pain. It does not address the problem. A significant loss of any type can lead to depression. That can include a divorce, a death, financial problems, a loss of your job. These can increase your feelings of hopelessness and helplessness, which can lead to depression. especially if you witness or know someone that's isolating themselves socially. That can be a key sign to pay attention to. Here are some additional signs to look for social withdrawal. We all have different comfort levels. There are lots of ways to try to tell others and let others know you may need help. It can come as humor. You joke about it. Depression and suicide affect anyone, poor or rich, musicians, top athletes. A few years ago, Robin Williams, people that had unlimited resources, yet still chose suicide, or couldn't go on the way they were feeling. If only it was as simple as this cartoon. The string is a good analogy. Often mental breakdown and suicide are like this, a series of stresses or experiences over time, gradually breaking down the emotional strength until the last thread snaps. The mention of suicide makes most people uncomfortable and makes them uneasy. Hard to imagine a firefighter deciding to take their own life when all they want to do is help people. It goes against everything it takes to be a firefighter: courage, toughness, sacrifice, strength, putting one's life on the line in the face of danger, working together as a team. Suicide seems the opposite of what a firefighter is. Another moment to split into two groups and have some discussion. Group A, question, person calls you and says they're going to commit suicide. What would you do? Group 2, the question, a firefighter seems down, agitated, not sleeping, and has been missing a lot of calls and having family issues. What would you do here? Discuss in your group and then share the ideas. It's okay to ask openly and directly about suicide. This is not always the easiest question to ask, but if a person is thinking about suicide, it's important to do it. How can you ask? Some more samples. You've been through a very difficult time and experience. I need to ask, are you thinking about suicide? Are you having thoughts about killing yourself? If you don't feel comfortable asking, summarize what you see. You look very sad and have told me about things that you can't take anymore. Sometimes when people are feeling this way, they're thinking about suicide or taking their life. Are you thinking about it? Have you considered it? You seem very overwhelmed, but this is understandable given your tragic situation. Sometimes when people are feeling this way, they're thinking about suicide. Are you thinking about suicide? Ask the question directly. Know what to do if the answer is yes, and how to probe further if it's no and you still have a concern. What do you do if a person does tell you they're suicidal or you think they are? Always take the comments seriously. 80% of people that are going to commit suicide tell someone. Don't overreact. That will just escalate the situation. Be prepared to call 911 and stay with them until they are given assistance. If they're on the phone, tell them you'll come right over and talk, and then call 911 on the way. Don't try and handle the situation by yourself. What can you do if a person truly is suicidal? Listen, assure them that you'll be there, let them know that you're concerned, and don't leave them alone. Staggering statistics. Remember, this is preventable with early recognition and treatment. 10 people a day across Canada commit suicide. Men are 3 times more likely than females to attempt suicide and have a successful completion, especially men that are in emergency services. And remember, suicide is preventable. A quick video on firefighters dealing with suicide.
Okay, understood. You've conducted the 360, is that correct?
3 sides, Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie.
Okay, I'm teaming up Medic 41 with you. We've got exterior fire on the garage. Charlie side. We got smoke coming from the cable end on the Delta side of the house. The Charlie side fires on the garage level.
We all know that firefighters have a tough job. You go on dangerous calls, intense calls, and some of the things you see stick with you, even if you don't show it.
My experience in the fire service is that firefighters are the stoic, the monolith who don't show emotions.
That works to a certain extent, but we do have a culture of substance abuse, self-medicating, those types of things with personal problems.
So we self-internalize all our fears and all our anxieties and all our stress.
And that's when firefighters get in trouble. That's when I got in trouble as a firefighter. I tried to keep it all in, and it almost undid me.
Firefighters, they're a tough breed, but they're human too, and they have emotions, and those emotions can be affected. I don't care how tough they are.
Of course, some calls are tougher to deal with than others, like suicides.
Suicide calls can be confusing for the fire service. We're called to help people when they need help, when they're in fear, when they're in pain, when they're suffering. But when we arrive on that suicide call, we have absolutely no control. And instead of being the rescuers, the responders, now we're the fellow grievers.
When we do go on calls, and especially suicides, and especially young people's suicides, I see the individuals that go on the call equating that with their own families. I have a son that's 10 years old. I have a niece that's 15 years old.
I can remember every single suicide, every single death by suicide, or that individual still alive. I can remember the scene. I can remember what we did.
The most recent call, a man lit himself on fire.
This man was badly burned. He was probably close to 90% over 3rd-degree burns, and he was still alive and talking quite consciously. He did not live but another 12 hours, and we had all figured that would be the case. And even being on the peer support team and providing support, this is a prime example where I was not aware of how that would affect me personally. This particular call with the gentleman who burned himself is really odd that it's bringing up almost my entire career, which is interesting. I'm at the latter part of my career, so it's like things are showing up out of the blue. And I've read about that, but it can really happen.
The impact can go on and on. The chief remembers a fellow firefighter who killed himself 20 years ago.
I just recently did a suicide program for the department, and I went back now 20 years ago to relive the situation, to ask the individuals that were involved how they felt nowadays. And I got such an emotional response from them that I knew I had to get involved in this and try to help with this, because I had people crying about it still after 20 years of he was such a respected person. They looked up to him. One of the young gentlemen I was speaking with, he wrote a letter to this individual afterwards. Told him he was very angry with him. I see your family now. I see what they're doing. I see how they're going through things. He wrote a letter. He took it to the wife, the spouse, and showed it to her, and crying again. And he laid it on his grave afterwards as to, this is what I had to do. I'm not happy with you. I'm angry with you, but I respect you. And I'm having to do this now to get on with my life.
So what do you do when you're feeling troubled, anxious, angry? You talk about it.
Stuck. I don't know what to do.
You talk about issues, you feel better about it. When you keep things bottled up, we know that the psychological and the stress on the body is just overwhelming.
Talking about your feelings can be horrible because that's when you're at your most vulnerable. But it can be amazingly refreshing and cleansing as well. It's kind of like in the spring when you clean out your garage, or the first time you go into the garden and you dig out all the stuff. You got to get all the old stuff out, and then by doing that, you can be refreshed and ready to go.
So you can almost physically see a difference in their opening up, in their expression, just a lightness of being.
For me, it made me a better firefighter because then I could fill it up with some more achy calls and drain it off, and then fill up and then drain it off, and that's the only way to make it work.
That leaves the question, who do you talk to? Well, for one thing, you talk to each other.
You live with each other, you have a team atmosphere, you kind of recognize the individuals that might be having problems. You watch them as much as you can, you ask them questions as much as you can.
And we need to walk up to each other and say, are you feeling okay or something wrong? Because we have no problem going on emergency calls and talking to our patients and saying, okay, why are we here today? What's bothering you? What's going on with you? And why did you call us? Why can't we have that same with our brothers and sisters at the firehouse? You seem a little isolated. You seem a little down today. Is there something wrong with you? We need to be more proactive and better communications among ourselves.
Many departments offer other resources for help, like peer support programs.
Peer support has trained members that are available to either reach out to that individual, or what's really neat, why peer support really works well, is that we as trained advisors may be working with an individual and very comfortably may begin a conversation just on a regular duty day.
Just in our peer support group in the last couple of years, we've had 250 some contacts in the department. We have about 12 members, and we do get a lot of use.
We're the people who take care of the people, but we also need to remember that we need help as well. So to have those resources, like our peer support team, they're the people who take care of the people who take care of the people. And once we realize that's an important part of that chain of survival or chain of life, I think that's what we need to do.
If you're reluctant to talk to someone in the firehouse, there are other resources. Many departments offer counseling through an employee assistance program, and most departments have a chaplain.
You know, it was always the fire service culture. You leave all your issues at the door, you walk in, you're ours for 24 hours. When you go home, you can do whatever you want. But what we're finding now is that fire departments are being proactive. They're understanding what the value of an employee assistance program is, what the value of resources outside employee assistance programs, like counselors that have experience in dealing with firefighters. They're understanding the importance of chaplain programs can play in the roles of people.
It certainly is worth accessing, reaching out for help. It's worth expressing it. It helps you, actually. It helps you to stay present for the next call, for the next moment with whom you're working with, for the next moment with a family member.
I'm finding more and more that the ultimately strong firefighters are those who have the guts to share and deal with that aspect of their lives. It's easy to block yourself in and keep it all inside. But if you want to be the strongest firefighter you can be that leader and take care of all the stuff up in the vault that most people don't deal with.
You know what? It's okay to talk. It's okay to hurt, because we're human beings first, and then we're firefighters.
Your efforts to sustain mental health in the firehouse are ongoing, even after a crisis has passed. Stress, fear, anger, and other challenges can accumulate over time. If you're concerned about your peers, don't ask just once if they need help. Keep asking until you know they're getting help. Here are suicide risk factors and warning signs to watch for. We'll follow this with a list of additional resources. So, what are the signs that you or a coworker might be in?
What are the worst four-letter word or words in emergency services? The one that we don't say easily. Help. No one likes to ask for help, but often we may need it. Why is it so hard for a firefighter to ask for help? It doesn't show weakness. Possibly the perception of weakness from coworkers. People don't like to share personal information and have that trust and confidentiality in the resources that are available to them. The stigma, the embarrassment that they can't cope with the issues at hand. It could be difficult to access the resources. They don't know where to go, what time. Fear that accessing those resources may affect their job performance or status. Just simple embarrassment. It may be costly. What can you do proactively to minimize the risk of PTSD, suicide, and depression? Don't be afraid to ask for help is the most important factor. Keep around positive people who support you. And use your resources, the EAP, the peer support, counseling, friends and family. You should have a go-to person, someone you've shared personal experiences with before, someone you trust. Could be a friend, family, colleague, counselor. But don't wait until you need that resource in case it's important and urgent. Know who that person is. If you're lost or can't find that person and not in a good situation, call 911. And what would you do for someone else? Same thing. Offer to listen, call someone, and last resort, call 911. Although emergency services workers do experience high levels of stress, learning the signs, symptoms, and being proactive can reduce the risk significantly of the chances of PTSD, anxiety, and depression. How do you help yourself? Know the acronym, MANNERS. Minimize. If you're at a traumatic scene, a car accident for example, once you're done your job, remove yourself from the scene. Don't take in more visual stimulus than you need to. Acknowledge your feelings. It's okay and normal to be upset by what you see sometimes. Normalize. Give your time to the feelings. Give it time to process. But if they're really intense or they linger, get help. Educate yourself. Reach out, find out what resources are available to you. Talk to another firefighter, peer member, family, friend, professional. Resolve. If your feelings linger or become more intense, don't wait for them to resolve. Get assistance early. And lastly, self-care. Only you know yourself that well to recognize symptoms and signs early. Don't wait. Again, if you need help or you suspect it, get it. Disclaimer, this information is not for self-diagnosis. If you have symptoms, seek professional help. Coping skills take time to learn, and they're multifaceted. Know them all. All these components make up an excellent way to cope with stress in everyday life and in emergency services. Imagine yourself. You are approaching this firefighter. What would you say? What would you do? What wouldn't you do? Consider, are you okay? How can I help you? Can I sit with you? What do you need? What can I do? Is there someone else at home? Can I take you somewhere? Don't leave them alone. In closing, PTSD is a serious issue that can lead to death, suicide. If you or someone you love, care about, work with, family member, friend, show signs of anything that we've demonstrated through this slide, talk to them or get help. Help them get help. Help those who give help. Thank you. Copies of this presentation, the original PowerPoint, are available with notes for all the slides. Please leave a comment if you would like the original.